and we're starting a new module. Um, I think I got everyone's assignment who did not present. So I should be good to go there. Karen, I got the copy of your notes. Did you try to re-enter those notes? Because everything was set up.
I did. I went in and deleted what I had entered and then just put it in new and it took it. But when I tried to do that last night, it wouldn't let me. So maybe it was that, or maybe it was midnight.
I don't know, because I was wondering, yeah, like I was going to ask, I want to find a delicate way to do this. Say, well, what time was this? You know,
Fair question.
yeah. Generally, I've only had a chance to read the papers through once, and that was this morning. Generally, I would say they were good. There is still a tendency for people to submit, in some cases, what looks like a first draft, because there will be obvious errors, things that just a simple read through, especially, by the way, especially on short material, read it out loud. I think it comes from like 10 years of doing audiobooks, but I would forever start, engineers working with me would notice, I would start to edit a sentence that didn't make sense. And I would just on the fly fix it, And I just got used to that thing. These people can't write. And then I realized, no, not only can they not write, no one edited this thing. So that second look you get, I hear someone's pet. Whose pet am I hearing? It's not a problem. I'm just curious. It doesn't sound like a very big pet.
No, it's not.
Well, then I'm not a fan. I'm sorry. My sister has a small dog, though. Yeah, see that. I don't diss anybody's pets. It's like telling people their kids are ugly when they are.
You just come knowing they're ugly, so it's no offense.
That's the thing. Those dogs know. That's like, yeah, and but I had to read. Yeah, here we are, right in the middle of class, right? Boy, this is intellectual life. Anyway, my sister got this little dog. We always had big dogs in our family. She got this little dog called a miniature schnauzer, I think. And it's like one of those things like, put it in your pocket kind of things. But she just completely won me over. She's funny and kind of really smart and everything, like a circus dog. She's kind of like a circus dog. So I was like, all right, I have a little bit more open mind about small dogs than I used to have, but I'm just not a fan. Not a fan. But anyway, isn't that fascinating? And later on, we'll tie that into terrorism. Apropos your writing, though, it is a question of sort of owning your work, and part of that is just putting the time in. When you think you're done, give it another look, because it's not just for me. It's not just, oh, Bill's a little hard grader, because I'm not really particularly. But the idea is get in the habit of doing that. Get in the habit of calling your own work out. You'll make it better, and you'll get in the habit of doing that. And there will be very few times where you will be caught, like in whatever job you go on to, or career or anything, where, your supervisor will catch you and say, why didn't you catch that? Because it's one thing to do that, when you're turning in some paper to Bill Hughes. No one really cares very much about that. But if someone's paying you, $50, $60, $70, $80, $100,000 a year, and you do that same thing and make their enterprise look stupid, they're not going to be thrilled with you. They're not. And as someone who edits the work of a lot of scholars who are tenured and have PhDs and have books under their names, there are a lot of people out there who are lazy writers, or who are just not effective writers and need a lot of help. So, and it's because they developed bad habits and no one came along and said, hey, you got to not do that. You got to not do that. You got to work on your writing. And so their egos are very healthy. Their writing is not. So it's just one of those things. Take one more look, don't wait. If the deadline is Sunday, you should be revising on Sunday, not cutting a first draft. Okay. I keep saying that, and people keep giving me that kind of knowing nod, and then almost no one does it. But I'm just saying, if you want your work to, forget about your grades, for a second, and just think about the quality of what you produce as a human being. You got to put some time in. It's just there's no substitute for that. Okay. Other than that, though, generally speaking, I think it seemed like everyone was comfortable with, you know, the dilemmas of trying to define terrorism, or whether or not terrorism, so there's something about terrorism that's new, what that newness might mean. I mean, most of the time in the written material, I got the feeling that, you know, the person writing more or less understood what he or she was trying to say. So as long as that's the case, then, you know, it's not a question of grades, but refine your work, get in the habit of doing that. All right. All right. Now, in this module, it's a sort of a transition module from the first one. And what I did first of all was I outlined what are generally considered, either by journalists or by academics or by national security people, to be some of the common motives, targets, and methods of terrorism. I'm not at all saying that any or all of these are correct, right? Or that any are more likely than any other, okay? But when you get into the readings, okay, there's going to be a little bit, there's a different perspective in the readings, but the discussion is going to be very brief, and I'm going to give you today is just background and trying to figure out, okay, why terrorism? Okay, part of that is understanding and identifying terrorism, not juridically, but operationally, as asymmetrical warfare. Okay, terrorism, whatever else it might be, properly understood, I think the best definition in terms of methods and tactics is asymmetrical warfare. You know, we have to go up against an adversary, typically a sovereign state that can take revenue from its people, that can get aid from other sovereign entities or from multinationals, can create and sustain a military, might have heavy duty hardware, might be aligned with a powerful country like back in the Cold War days, the Soviet Union, maybe China, maybe the United States, maybe Britain. Now it could just be any powerful country, okay? And as a consequence of that, they have the firepower, the resources, the training, the facilities to mount a sustained war, okay? And we are, let's say, a disaffected ethno-religious group living in the hills, and you know, we just want to be left alone. That is, as often as not, that is the motivation of a lot of so-called international terrorism, is leave us alone, go away. If you come here, we will fight you, okay? The classic example of that would be Afghanistan. All of South Asia, really, but Afghanistan. Afghanistan poses no threat to the world at all. Almost, you know, no terrorist organization living and existing and operating right now poses an existential threat to any sovereign country, except the one in which it's based or its immediate neighbor, okay? And even that is rare, that a terrorist organization can be so effective as to pose an existential threat to a sovereign state with a resource base. When they are effective, it's not necessarily that they win the war, but that they use tactics. They acknowledge asymmetry. We're never going to catch up with them. Okay, we're never going to have tanks. We're never going to have gunships. We're never going to have, you know, anything but light weaponry or whatever. Okay, but it often is the case that they can say, either we're fighting on our home turf, we know this land, they do not. We have the support of the people around us, hearts and minds, right? Okay, but it's that acknowledgement of terrorism as warfare and as asymmetrical warfare. You use the resources that you do have, understanding that you don't have very many and none of them is terribly powerful, okay? So this notion of asymmetrical warfare is the first thing to think about. So then it begs the question, well, okay, so warfare, why? Why are you fighting, okay? And typically, it's going to be because at least the so-called terrorists, the aggressors, perceive themselves to be so aggrieved that they have no alternative. Okay, at least that's the way the struggle is framed in order to recruit and mobilize and direct, you know, rank and file, to actually get foot soldiers for that asymmetrical warfare. Is, look what they've done to us. Here's who they are. You always other the enemy in the abstract. You dehumanize them. You make of them a malevolent force of nature, or you make of them a force from the netherworlds, with Mephitic Greek, whatever, the great Satan, something like that, that will galvanize the attention of people, that will, juice them with a little bit of outrage and adrenaline, and that those things can sustain the sacrifices that are inevitably necessary in this asymmetrical warfare. It's a very, very difficult way to fight, okay? So there is always this notion of to increase the awareness and visibility of perceived grievances. They've done this to us. They're thwarting our religion. Think, for example, of the circumstances leading up to 9/11. One of the real outrages there was after the Gulf War. The United States established in Riyadh a very large military presence. The problem is that Saudi Arabia, essentially, you're talking about Mecca. You're talking about the absolute center of the universe for Islam, okay? The holiest of holy places. People go on Hajj to go to Mecca, okay? And now they're going and they're encountering what? American soldiers and a vast American base, okay? One of the initial grievances of what, became Al-Qaeda initially was the idea that there were infidels, right, and crusaders, right, in Mecca, okay, and that they had to be expelled. And that was one of the objectives. Now, when everyone talks about that, everyone forgets that these days. No one remembers that could be seen, particularly by devout Muslims, that could be seen as a legitimate grievance. You can't do this to us, okay? The idea that Saudi Arabia was complicit in that just reinforced the idea that the Saudi regime was brutal, corrupt, and just preyed upon its own people, okay? And obviously then was irreligious. It did not appreciate the religious significance of the very geography it inhabited and things like that. What people forget about that when they talk about, oh yeah, well, we kicked Al-Qaeda's butt, or we kicked this person's ass, or whatever it was, they got what they wanted. First of all, the Islamic world looked at that and didn't like it, okay? But also, we left, and we didn't want to leave. We left. We went to other places. You'll notice we have bases now in other parts of the Middle East, but not in Saudi Arabia. Okay, that's why. Essentially, you could make the argument they ran us out. Okay, finally there were people within the State Department and the military who realized, you know what, we could solve part of this problem by getting the hell out of there. Let's just get those troops out of there. People also forget that there was a terrorist attack, in quotes, terrorist attack on that base. All right, now there's no way that an organization of just aggrieved people are going to attack a military installation run by the United States and be able to defeat it, okay? But they made it go away, and that's what they wanted. So that's asymmetrical warfare, is we have a grievance that is so profound we have to fight. You've pushed us against the wall. We can't back up. We can't retreat. You don't leave us any alternative. Now that we have to fight, we're going to use any means we have at our disposal. So yeah, that means that we're going to think of the Viet Cong in South Vietnam. All right, we're gonna we're gonna throw hand grenades into the bars where American soldiers go all the time, and we're gonna make all these different kinds of booby traps and things like this, and we're going to work aggressively to recruit the support of the people in these areas, and the responses of the United States to that generally tended to be ineffective and heavy-handed, with very few exceptions. But that's all they had. They were up against the regular army of South Vietnam, trained and financed and organized and equipped by the United States, plus an increasing presence of American military personnel, which by, let's say, 1966 is 500,000. Okay, that's a big fighting force, okay, against a bunch of people, essentially, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but think about this. People running around in, like plastic shoes and pajamas and carrying, a day's ration of rice and an AK-47, and they couldn't defeat us militarily, and they didn't, okay? But there are a lot of ways to win a conflict. And one of the things that people don't understand about guerrilla warfare, insurgency, and the use of terrorist tactics is this is done by people who believe they have no alternative. So they're going to lean into it because all they really want is to convince you to leave. It's not even about defeating you. It's about making you go away, making it stop, okay? And so they're not worried too much about international law because they're not a signatory to any treaty. They're not a sovereign state, okay? So this idea of the visibility of grievances, destabilization of a social, political, and economic order, I mean, that's kind of built into a lot of the definitions we talked about. The expectation is that your objective is to destabilize the prevailing terms of order in some way, to interrupt economic cycles, to make people feel so insecure that they can't carry out the regular business of the day. They're not safe to travel. They're not safe to go out and recreate. You know, we see a lot of this visited upon, for example, Israel. You know, there are periods of time where just the proposition of, you know, going to a concert or going out for a meal can be like stepping into a battleground, you know, depending on what the intensity of grievances is and the mobilization of insurgent forces, okay? And this notion of asymmetrical violence against a perceived aggressor, there's very seldom will you hear in the rhetoric of so-called terrorist organizations, we're going to come over there and get you. It's more like, you did this, you pushed us to this. The CIA has a term for this. Really, they call it blowback. And the argument with some of the more astute analysts about 9/11 was, this is blowback, you know, and the CIA analysts knew this. They knew that there was such an intense animosity with respect to the United States that went all the way back to the 1950s, to the Suez Crisis, to any number of things, to our backing of dictatorial leaders in the Middle East and elsewhere. Same thing in Sub-Saharan Africa, same thing in Latin America. You know, the whole Yankee go home thing is, stop backing butchers. They're butchering us. Stop doing that. If you don't, we'll have to fight you, you know, or we'll have to make common cause with your worst nightmare enemy, the Soviet Union, you know, or perhaps with China. You know, China was beginning, as its industrial plant began to stabilize and improve and they could produce weaponry and things like this. Yeah, they became, you know, a very important destabilizing force, in quotes, in places like Southeast Asia. China's always been important. The more that they turn outward, the more formidable they become, partly because China plays a long game. But if you are an aggrieved insurgent organization, you often are looking around for a patron. You need some resources. You think about the Tamil insurgency, you know, the Tamil Tigers. There was a time when they had an air force, you know. It's because they were able to make common cause with other countries that could help them with resources to do that, okay? Or you'll find, like, in, you know, in parts of the Philippines, in order to finance their operations, they'll kidnap, you know, often either wealthy Filipinos or wealthy foreigners. And they don't really particularly want to keep them very long, but they want the $1 million ransom or whatever it is. And it's why now one of the most lucrative businesses internationally is kidnap insurance. You know, where the idea is there's a likelihood you're going to be taken hostage. Your company is paying a premium so that if you're taken hostage, we'll be notified, there will be a negotiator, there will be a team in the field, we'll cut a deal, it's all worked out, and then you'll be able to go home. Okay, it's just become, you know, so commonly accepted because, again, think of it as asymmetrical warfare. We don't have your economy, but you know what? On the local level, if we get $1 million from you, that's like $1 billion to us. There's a lot we can do with that. Okay, so in terms of general motives, the purpose of that is to say, okay, if those are the essential motives of terrorist organizations, then what are their targets? And I list them there. You know, violence against property, targeting leadership. Okay, violence against institutions. You can even think of this when you think of like the Munich Olympics, 1972, and you know, you think of that organization of Palestine, aggrieved Palestinians. Why would they do that? Why would they go to Munich, and that, which was a hassle logistically, go to Munich, infiltrate the Olympic Village, take Israeli athletes hostage, right? With apparently no immediate intention of killing them, all right? But as a consequence of what some people argue was a botched rescue attempt, many of them end up dying. Okay. Okay. Well, because they were attacking an institution. They were attacking an institution that, among other things, wasn't inviting them to the Olympics. Okay. They were attacking simultaneously the sovereignty of Israel, who they perceived as a fundamental aggressor locally in the region. They were attacking the entire global order of sovereign states that's glorified in the Olympics every 4 years. Okay. The massive outpouring of wealth for every one of those orgies of nationalism that is the Olympics every 4 years. Okay. And they're saying, we're going to do something that's going to shock you so that you'll never forget this and you'll never forget us. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work that way for anybody, unfortunately. I mean, you know, people died. It was a shocking event at the time. That was when the Olympics were much more important and much more widely viewed in the United States than is the case now. It was also at a time when there had been some airline hijackings and a number of, you know, there was a growing awareness of the grievances leading to international terrorism. Okay. And also, it wasn't something we could lay at the doorstep of the Soviet Union. We couldn't just say, well, look, this has Russia's fingerprints all over it. It was clear that it didn't. Okay. It was attacking every sovereign state and their security. Okay. We talked about that a little bit. We talked about, the notion of terrorism as an attack on the international system of states, Okay. And then finally, again, violence against populations. Sometimes if you believe you're left with no alternative, you might attack civilian populations. You're not as likely to do that, though. For example, a lot of people ask me after 9/11, I spent a lot of time trying to explain that in sort of local events and things, and lost what little popularity I ever had because everyone believed stupidly that I was trying to justify it instead of, because explaining, of course, is justifying. They said, well, why didn't they just, some guy said, why didn't they just, take the planes and drive him into, like Disneyland or something like that? And I asked the guy, so, well, what would your reaction to that have been? And, he gave me that kind of dull look that tired 5-year-olds give you. But you could see in the whole room, everybody was thinking, oh, shit, that's right. Because part of this is hearts and minds. They're trying to elevate the legitimacy of their grievances. You don't necessarily do that by murdering children and their families. Okay. It's one thing to murder a bunch of people who you see as the belly of the capitalist beast. You're just saying, look, they're not innocent. And never mind what innocence means, but you just say, no, they're part of the machine. They're foot soldiers in global capitalism and the global, attack on, religious life and on Islam and on whatever, it's our sovereignty as people and our dignity and all that. That's a little easier case to make than to say, oh my God, they killed, 2,000 people in Disneyland, just families recreating, So there is an understanding, and people, when people wonder, well, why don't they do that? Because they're not the insane lunatics that you all think they are. That would be insane. That would be irrational. Okay. And there's a lot more rationality that goes into the planning and execution of these operations than most Americans want to believe. Okay. Because if you believe that the techniques are rational, if you believe that the targets are rational, it compels you to consider that their grievance also might be rational. And we're just not encouraged to do that. It's not, in other words, to understand a grievance as rational and legitimate is not to justify the tactics used. Okay. But you can't do anything about terrorism by just saying these are a bunch of religious lunatics or these are a bunch of racist pigs or whatever they are. That doesn't explain why they did what they did. It just doesn't. Okay, so that's what I want us to start thinking about, okay? Now, in order to do that, we've got these 5 pieces of literature, and what I'd like to do is find out who wants to present these. And they're not all necessarily supposed to apply to terrorism, but I think they do, particularly the first article, Uses of Violence. The first thing that will surprise you about that was the original publication date is 1963. Okay. And Nieberg's article is really interesting because I don't want to, supersede whoever's going to present that, but he's essentially arguing, look, violence is a part of politics. And he explains what he means by that. But what he's trying to say is we're fools to think that every time there's violence, it's an aberration and we can just crush it. And we should always just crush it. And, when people threaten violence, that's an immediate license to destroy them. That is to do what? To use violence. Okay. That is an interesting article because it can help us to cast in more objective terms, and I think more illuminating ways, the motivations for people to pursue this asymmetrical warfare and all the sacrifices that implies and requires. Okay. So that's one. The notion of suicide terror. I'm not a big fan of this article, but it's a perspective that needs to be considered. Okay. And this has to do with analyzing the motivation of people who, as a tactic, take their own lives in order to make a statement, and sometimes take other lives with them. Okay. The thing that a lot of people forget here, again, a lot of times they don't. Okay. If you think about the self-immolation of Buddhist monks in South Vietnam, for example, they weren't hurting anybody. They only hurt themselves. But it was a horrifying thing for, like, a 9-year-old kid to see on the news, or in the newspapers. Even the still photographs of that were horrifying. I remember as a little kid and thinking, why would somebody do that? Somebody's done something terrible, right? Motivations of lone actor terrorists. This is a different kind of thing, okay? There are distinctions that can and must be drawn between people who self-radicalize, as it's often referred to, who might be inspired by news about the activities of an insurgent or terrorist organization and then just decide, yeah, I'm going to get me a piece of that, or they take out their own personal grievances and act out in a way that's described as terrorism. What are the motivations for that? Why do people do that? And a companion to that is this implicit motives of terrorist attacks and this notion of born radicals. The assumption by some counter-terrorist, in quotes, experts, that some people are that's just what they do, So these are very different perspectives in many ways on the use of violence, asymmetrical warfare, the tactics of terror, of physical intimidation, destruction of property and life, and the idea of inspiring terror in a population as what you believe to be the most effective way to pursue your objectives. Okay. So what I'd like to do then is find out, first of all, on the uses. I have to write this down. Sorry for the clattering. Uses of violence. Who wants to do that?
I'll do it.
Okay. These can probably be done by one person. What about suicide terror? Okay. And motivations of lone actor terrorists.
I'll do that.
I can do it.
Wait a minute, hold on. Damn it, I hate this because I'm looking at your screen. Do you ever notice that when you're typing and you're watching what you're typing, you can't type?
Yeah.
All right, now I'm sorry. Who jumped first on that?
There was 2 of us.
Who was it?
It was me and Mandolin.
Probably have you both do that. All right. Implicit motives. The implicit motives article has to do with the framing of an experience as sort of in-group or out-group and stuff like that. A lot of it is, Alison Smith does a lot of, for want of a better term, sort of political psychology, I think. So that might be something interesting. All right, so nobody's jumping on that. Let's move on. What about born radicals? Jason, is that you? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so does nobody want to do the implicit motives one? Because if you don't, then I can summarize that one.
I mean, could we do 2-in-1 module, like if you need it? Like not necessarily toward credit, but like just if you need me to, I can do 2 in this one. Just so you can talk about it.
We could. Yeah, we could. I mean, the uses of violence article is 13 pages, so it's not
Not
that
bad.
long, but and the essence of that argument is something that can be distilled pretty readily. I'm going to put you down for it.
I'll share. I'll co-share.
Oh, all right.
I mean, we're running out of humans.
Well, the only thing is, my experience with this is when your colleagues are presenting for you, for some reason, I think it holds your attention. I think you get tired of listening to me. It's like, oh God, Hughes is going to start bloviating again. I got to go. You know, I have a migraine. And also, I think when you know you're going to present on something, I do think you put a little more work into it and you learn it more effectively. Once you've learned it, when you then explain it, you learn it even more. Okay, so I just think it's a useful exercise. Also, doing it online like this, it's not like you're sitting in front of a room full of people. You know, you're in a comfortable place. I think it's become easier to do, and I find it valuable. Okay, all right, so that's what we'll do then. I don't think there was a whole lot more we needed to cover today, really. The main thing was that I wanted to make sure that if you had questions on the last assignment, or if you had questions on any of these readings, if you'd had a chance to glance at them. I know that, you know, you just turned in an assignment. You may very well not have had yet a chance to look at the next batch of readings, but that's okay. Other than that, are there any questions or concerns so far? I mean, this is only week 3. We're just kind of getting going in this. When I put the grades in, I've assigned preliminary grades for the presentations. I haven't normed them yet. There are some things that I do. I thought the presentations generally were very good. Okay. I don't think anybody did any worse than like a B, you know. I mean, I thought they were, especially for first presentations, I tend to go a little easier on the first ones. The papers are a mixed bag and it's going to take me a little longer to read them. Also, I've got to do 355 papers and some of those really need a lot of work. So I may not post grades before Friday, but I always say this and I always mean it. If you're concerned about your grade or you're not sure how you did on the first one and you want to get a sense of that, if you shoot me an email, I'll push you to the front of the queue and I can give you within about half a grade or so. I can tell you this is kind of the range within which your work for. Either here's some things you need to work on, or you know what, you're solid, don't worry about it, don't lose any sleep. Okay, because I don't want you to sit around and just, you know, be anxious about it and worry about it. There are other things to think about, you know. That would work for me. We could maybe break it up.
I did not mean to send that to everyone.
Oh, okay, I see that. Yeah, you're all right. There is a private chat function, by the way, you know, sometimes very helpful. Only because when things pop out at me, it's like a shiny object. Oh, look, pretty, you know. Moving things, yeah. All right. Any other questions? Any other comments? Is this stuff making sense so far? Is it, you know, I mean, are you getting anything out of it? Because I never know, especially in this environment, but generally speaking, this subject matter often leaves people really cold. Okay. All right. Then in that case, we get a short day. There's nothing wrong with that. Going forward, I'm available a lot during the week. Okay, I've got that regular noon to 1 office hour and I can just shoot you a Zoom link and we can meet them. But I also try to be available pretty much throughout the day. Like today I got stuck in some meetings, but that's not every day. So I'm often available. You know, if you've drafted something out and you want to discuss it or something like that, we can do that. Okay, not that you may need to, but if you do, I don't want you to feel like, I don't want to bother them. I get paid to do this. It's a great gig. All right. Nothing else? If not, then I will see you next week.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, you can. I'll stick around, Quinn. Let me stop recording.
I want to say sorry for being
One
late.
second.